So hi everyone, welcome today. This is something totally different for me and I think for John as well, maybe. John Maggiore, I'm going to let him kind of introduce himself. This is the second time John is visiting my page. Usually I'm visiting John's page. One time John was kind enough to offer to review an album of mine called Before and After COVID, which was last year. And that was kind of a cool, like thematically, I think it was an interesting kind of thing to do because everyone who's lived through that could relate to COVID. And so we had an interesting conversation, not only about music, but about things around it. And today, I want to kind of be the interviewer in a way, though it's a two-way conversation, and not be the one actually chit-chatting, talking the whole time, because I have this tendency to kind of go off on tangents. So I want to let John talk, and I want to, by way of introducing John, I'm going to start with my first question, without getting too chit-chatty with this big, long introduction. The first time that John interviewed me, and it wasn't via Zoom, but via like text, for his blog, he asked me, like, who are you, or who is Marc Lowe, or could you give me like, the biography?
Yeah.
And I gave my kind of weird answer, and that was sort of the kickoff point. So I'm going to start with that question, and I'm going to phrase it this way. Who is John Maggiore? John, or John Maggiore, who do you think John Maggiore is, or how would you like to how would you like to describe John Maggiore for the audience as John Maggiore, my guest today, etc. So something like this, and I'll let you take it from there.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me on your channel, and thank you for coming on mine. My name's John Maggiore, and what we're talking about my channel, so I'll start with that. That's not my defining characteristic, but I have a daily blog that is focused around David Bowie, and a spin-off of that is a weekly YouTube interview show where I interview guests that have some connection to David Bowie. And Mark has been my guest a few times, and hopefully will again come back on my show. That the blog and the show are actually a hobby for me. My professional life is in New York State government. I live in Albany, New York. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and Buffalo is part of my Buffalo is part of my identity. But Mark mentioned the COVID experience, and
Yeah.
my blog went from something that I did occasionally, that I would write posts for nobody, just for fun, and they were accessible, but not really something I drew attention to during the lockdown, as a kind of mental health exercise, I committed just to myself to write a daily post. And so that I really started writing daily on the blog sometime during the lockdown. And again, I was writing for nobody, but if you're writing daily and the thread or the link is David Bowie, you have to really sort of look around for things to write about after a while. And I found that when you look, I mean, I've never been short of topics.
Mm.
And I would find other people's work that was somehow connected to Bowie and write about it, which I still do. And one day I found what was called a mashup, which before I found it, I'm sure I had encountered this type of thing before, but this guy whose name is Dom did a mashup of a Bowie song and a Talking Head song, and I'm still sort of a technological Luddite, and so I was there. I had this gee whiz type of reaction to it. It was so seamless that it sounded like I just thought it was cool, right? And so I wrote this blog post about it, and months later, he came across it.
Mm.
And so we started DMing each other back and forth. And he's a guy living in France, and I live in Albany, New York. And just the concept of this blew my mind. So I I said, "Hey, Dom, what would you think if I sent you a few questions and you sent me some responses and I posted like an interview?" He said, "Sure." So we did that. And then I thought, well, maybe I should ask other people whose work I posted about. And Mark, I think you were the second person that I asked.
Yeah.
And you had done you've done several Bowie reinterpretations, and this was a fairly, by your standards, a fairly conventional one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had featured it on this. I have this weekly feature called Cover of the Week, where, just again, it's now I'm doing too much talking, but
No, no, no,
it,
please.
yeah, it's an amazing thing that the cover of the week, part of the challenge is only a challenge for myself, is to find a new Bowie cover that somebody somewhere posted every week. And by new, it means posted within the last week.
Yeah.
And every week I have multiple options to choose from, professional bands that put out really, high quality, high production value videos and covers, to what I think of as guys in their basement with the guitar,
Yeah.
which they could be playing really well and singing really well and bringing something new. That just because they're a guy in their basement with the guitar doesn't mean they're not any good, right? But
Absolutely. Absolutely.
right. And
Absolutely.
I've never had a challenge finding something worth posting. But I found one of your covers and posted it. I reached out to you, and then, like you said, I sent you. This was what at first I was sending these written questions, and you sent me like a book.
I know.
And
I'm just as bad in
yeah,
text as when I talk. It's my
yeah, I broke it up into like three different posts
yeah.
because you gave me a lot of material. I was like, it just blew me away. So we've been in some kind of communication ever since. So
Yeah.
that's sort of like how we got here, more than me. But I think, in my own mind, I define myself by where I come from, which is Buffalo and New York and upstate New York, and what I do. And my career has been in state government, and why I'm here, and the connecting thread is Bowie and this project. So let me sort of stop there, because you could take that however, in whatever direction you want to go.
Yeah, no, no, that's good. I actually, I mean, I have a lot of things I could also say about the blog,
Yeah,
because not only have I been a guest, obviously, on the blog and on not the show, what to call it, this Zoom kind of interview,
yeah.
YouTube
No,
version.
it's a show. It is a show. Yeah.
The
It's an
YouTube
interview
version
show.
is maybe actually, I have a ton of other things I was thinking, but before even
Yeah.
getting there, how about like just really basic questions one by one? And I'm gonna try.
Yeah.
So I'm really bad at that. Like I always go off on tangents too quickly. Let's take it, step by step. So, right. So for viewers who are not as familiar with your David Bowie blog and show on
Yeah.
YouTube, maybe you could talk more about how, because you just mentioned how we touch base and it was the written version, but actually the next part of that, and that also includes with you and I, but between that and before you did the first interview with me on Zoom, you
Yeah.
started interviewing others
Yeah.
that way, and then you created your YouTube page, which now seems to me a major part of like the blog
Yeah.
is almost, you said to me, almost in a way secondary, although I don't think of it that way, and I know you don't, but in terms of
Yeah.
like viewership,
Yes.
and maybe you can talk about how that developed and how where that's taken you in terms of your interviewing. You mentioned, right? You talked just now about the cover of the week, but
Yes.
also how about the interviews? So the cover of the week you're doing
Yeah.
every week still, and I saw like yesterday I commented on one. Listen, it was great. The
Yeah.
Let's Dance cover, I really like that.
Yeah.
Um, but apart from the covers of the week and apart from your writing, and you had written interviews, but now you're doing Zoom like we're doing now.
Yeah.
You've had like some really like famous people on, let's say, people who are, like who were members of Bowie's band. You had Mike Garson on, and you had
Yeah.
various people and producers and people who were in like the management. There was like an audio interview early on, right? So maybe you want to talk about how it developed, and also like your last interview was about being an interviewer, right? With Miss Peggy.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so like maybe you could like I'm interviewing you now about what it's like you gave that interview to ask about that. And so I'm asking you maybe how is it to step into the role of interviewer
yeah.
and also contacting people and trying to get these interviews and scheduling them, and also like you took the time to do this with me today and you're really busy, even though you mentioned it's a hobby, but like it's a really busy one since
Yeah.
COVID. So
Yeah.
I'll try
Sure.
to shut up and let you kind of run with that, if that makes sense as the question. Like,
Yeah.
from blog to YouTube and etc. and the interviews. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
the blog, some of the writing that appears on the blog is still for nobody, right? People can
It's
access
not
it
for
and
no,
read
I
it.
read it. I'm sure others do.
Well,
Hmm.
no,
I love your writing, by the way.
well, oh, thank you.
I do. I do.
What I mean by it's for nobody is I'm not, with the blog, there's, I think, I've discovered Google Analytics, and so
Uh,
there are certain posts that get very little readership, and there are certain posts that I do social media promotion of because I think somebody it would be interested, like the cover of the week, right? So
yeah.
I think that is of interest. Sometimes I get on, the beauty of David Bowie and I think you appreciate, is because he was involved with so many different things, and he has so many songs that are about stuff but they're open to interpretation, that
Totally.
you could take a Bowie song as really an excuse to write about something else.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's, I'll get to the what you specifically asked, but I was thinking about this. I have a friend who, I don't know if she still does, but she used to do tarot card readings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I asked her, "Do you actually believe that there's something happening here?" And she didn't give me a straight answer, but she said, "Here's what I think."
Yeah.
She said, "I think it gives you a different way to think about the topic." And
Yeah.
I agreed with that because she didn't say anything about magic. Um, and I think, if you look at an issue through a Bowie lens,
Yeah.
it gives you a different way to think about the thing.
Yeah.
So going back to around the time, so this was the early 2024, is the interview started in February of 2024, right? So this is, we're speaking in August of 2025, so it wasn't really that long ago.
No.
But once they started, there was no week that passed where I wasn't able to publish an interview.
Yeah.
And so the first several interviews, I think 100% of the people I asked agreed.
Mm.
And I was sending these written interviews,
Mm.
and it didn't occur to me that uh, asking somebody to write a response is a bigger commitment than talking to somebody.
That's true.
So after doing a few written interviews, I I sent an email to a man named Simon Critchley,
Ah,
who,
yes. Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah, I know.
among other,
Sorry.
yeah, many other things, he is a professor.
Yeah.
So as you know, if somebody teaches, they have a public email address. So
Right. Right.
I what inspired me to write to him was an article that he wrote about Bowie
Hmm.
that I had quoted from before.
Hmm.
It turned out that was an excerpt from a book that he wrote about Bowie, and it turns out that that's one of dozens of books that he wrote.
Mm.
And I didn't fully appreciate that when I asked him if I could interview him, and he responded, "I'd be happy to talk to you about David Bowie, but why don't we do it as a YouTube interview rather than as a written interview?" I
Ah,
had no idea how to do this.
cool.
So
Hmm.
I was like, okay,
Uh-huh.
this is a serious guy and I don't
Yeah.
want to miss the opportunity. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I learned how to do it.
Yeah.
And um, so that was my first YouTube interview. And I mean, he's a pro at being interviewed and going on shows. He's on, like, if you ever Google him and look for videos, you'll get an endless number of videos.
Mm.
He's an internationally renowned philosopher. It's amazing
Yeah.
that he was talking to me.
Yeah.
And what he says is great. And if you go back and find this interview, I think, I didn't know what I was doing, but he seemed to be happy to talk to me. And um, there was, not it was not an immediate full switch from written interviews to videos, but it was a fairly quick transition. And now, almost all of I'd say all of the interviews are either video or audio. I just recently did one that's audio only, but it will
Yeah.
still post on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned famous people, and we actually had an email exchange before this interview, and you used that term, and I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
And like, we could talk about, like, well, let me ask you this. Like, when you say famous, what does that mean to you?
Fame gets.
Yeah, fame, fame, fame.
I won't. I mean, we could do the whole Bowie thing, but let's not do too
Yeah.
much. But yeah, no. What does famous mean? No, I mean, actually, that yeah, I shouldn't even use that term or kick it around that way, perhaps. And actually, I kind of at the back of my mind had that thought, like maybe that's not actually the right word. But these are people who have worked with closely with David Bowie.
Yeah.
Like when I mentioned Mike Garson, like for example, Mike Garson, to you and to me being Bowie fans and knowing that Mike Garson was with Bowie in the Spiders and
Yeah.
Aladdin saying he plays and he talked about that on your interview and he played a bit of I think Lady Grinning Soul.
Yeah.
For us, it's like, oh, Mike Garson,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
like if you ask someone on the street, hey,
Yeah.
you know who Mike Garson is? They go, what? Like
Yeah.
who is that? Or you ask one of my students who are that age, they have no idea unless they're really, 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 really into Bowie. Their parents were. So that's not like what is famous and what is fame. We could get
Yeah.
real philosophical. I could get real philosophical about what does it mean or not mean. So yeah, I use it very, very loosely and probably
Yeah.
recklessly in a way. And I'm not usually reckless in the way that I use my language, and I'm usually kind of so precise that sometimes people are actually confused because I'm too. So what do I mean? That's a good question, and I don't want to go off
Yeah.
too much on a tangent, but like that was just simply I meant names that would be familiar at least to people looking at a Bowie blog, like Mike Garson or
Yeah.
that. And there's some that, and I know, I mean, this would be another question about like who said yes and who didn't and why and how that is and so on. And
Yeah.
feels like from your end to not be able to get the one you really want to interview. Like that was the last interview you did, talking about this. Like, I won't, should I not mention names?
No,
But no,
don't
I'll
mention
mention,
names because I hold out hope.
there's one name maybe I could mention because this was like public. Like I just saw thing about Brian Eno, how he doesn't like to talk about David Bowie, and it's
Yeah, sure.
major.
Well,
Like it says,
that
Brian Eno doesn't
yeah.
want to talk about his past. He only wants to talk about now, and so and that's like more, So like if I kick the name Brian Eno out,
Yeah.
people say, well, he's famous or he's a well-known musician or producer, or so if I said he's famous, then people would say, oh yes, Brian Eno, that kind of way. I use
Yeah.
it that kind of way, but that was a little bit actually not a great precise use of the term. So,
No, so
uh,
I asked you with an answer in my own head that I don't know. Like, you gave a great example with Mike Garson. Mike
yeah,
Garson is, first of all, a music hero for me, right?
right.
And I think, as I'm learning more about music, I think he's recognized as, one of the great rock and roll keyboardists of the whole genre, right? Of all
In
time.
jazz, he's actually a
Well,
jazz
yeah.
musician.
Well, a multi-talented guy, right? And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just, any story any story you're going to write about David Bowie is going to include Mike Garson, but just I
exactly.
think any story you're going to write about rock music that gets into who played keyboards, it's hard not to mention him, right? So in
Sure.
terms of
Rick
that,
Wakeman, Mike
partic-
Garson. Mike Garson is one of the longest, right? And deepest.
yeah, right.
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
organized all the events after Bowie's death and all that too. So,
Sure,
right?
yeah. And
Yeah,
I would say one big difference between Mike Garson and Brian Eno
yeah.
is that Mike Garson is more accessible. Like
Right.
I could not get a request into Brian Eno's hands for him to say yes or no. That
You couldn't
I've
even
because
get
I've
through like the whole red tape of other people.
right. Like
Reminds
try,
me,
right?
tonight, may I make a literary reference here? I'll
Yeah.
just jump in. I'm trying not to jump in too much, but I have something this might turn us off on a slightly
Yeah.
tangent, but Franz Kafka, not the Metamorphosis. Do you know Franz Kafka?
Of course. Yeah.
I'm assuming. So like we've talked about
Yeah.
Orwell and all that. So I'm assuming you know who Franz
Yeah.
Kafka is, right? But there's this, you may or may
By
not.
the way, if Brian Eno is watching this, I'd love to have you on my show.
There you go.
Okay.
Why would Brian Eno be watching the Mark Lowe channel? I doubt it.
I don't know. I mean,
If
he's,
anything,
I found you. Maybe he's looking for
yeah,
you.
if anything, he's watching your channel, but not mine. So, but anyway, if he does, that'd be cool. And if you get it, then kudos,
Yeah.
congratulations. If that's my contribution to to your getting Brian, that'd be cool. But what I wanted to say about Kafka, there's a story I sometimes share with my students because it's very short. It's called Before the Law in translation, Before the Law. And it's this guy, it's Kafka, right? So it's a metaphor, right? It's this guy, he's standing before the gate, and there's a guardian of the gate. And he says, the law should be accessible to all. Why can't I get in? You won't let me in. He's guarding the gate. He says, sorry, but I can't let you in. And da, 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 da. And the guy's pestering, he's trying to get in, he's trying to trick him, he's trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to get into the gate of the law, which is
Yeah.
guarded. And the guardian of the gate uh, says to him, I think this is actually, yeah, it's at the end of the piece. It's a short piece, but at the end, the man's getting older and older and older. And at the end, he's an old man and he's bent down, he's half deaf. He still can't get into the law. You know, it's like Kafka's The Castle. He tries to get to the boss at the top and he can never get there.
Yeah.
It's always about red tape and going round and around. This is a short version of that. And at the end of his life, this man, at the end of the short piece, he says to the gatekeeper has to bend down because the man's deaf and he's bent over and old. And he says, let me ask you this one last question. He says, the law is supposed to be for all, right? And it seems to me that, like, in the population, there'd be so many people trying to get access to the law, to get into this gate. Why is no one else here? I'm at the end of my life. I haven't seen anybody else, and I've only seen you. And well, one thing he says is if you get beyond me, even if you got beyond this gate, there'd be another guardian at the next gate. And then beyond that, there'd be another guardian. So it's like this endless, you're never
Yeah.
going to get to the top or the law or the castle, right? Like in the castle, it's the same kind of thing. And so, he says, even for me, they're more and more terrifying guardians. Like even I can't look at them. They're too scary for me. But then the end of his life, he says, why don't I see any other people? And he says, because this gate is only for you and the others are for others. Gajang, and then the man dies at the end. But actually, that wasn't the point I was trying to make. The metaphor of you couldn't get to him because there were like people and then another, and it's like, can I please speak to Brian Eno? Wait a minute, you got to get past the
Yeah.
first gate, and then there's another gate probably, and another. So like that just gave me that image, and I thought, well, let me talk about Kafka because I love Kafka.
Yeah.
And like when we talk about David Bowie, we could talk about any infinite number of other things.
Yeah.
Here's my chance to riff a little bit on a few things you said. The second thing I held off, and I'll say, and then I'll let you go back to you talking, so that I don't monopolize the talk because I have a tendency to. That's a bad thing for me. But when you mentioned the tarot, and you use that also as a metaphor for how with Bowie you can kind of get into, it's a different way of looking at things.
Yes.
I mean, I find that we're getting to Bowie a little, but we're talking about Brian Eno and
Yeah.
Bowie, and interviews. But I think I just love that metaphor so much and what you had said about that. And I was thinking of Bowie in 1974.
Yeah.
I said we don't have to avoid Bowie, we don't have to talk about Bowie, but like where
I'm happy to talk about Bowie.
we'll talk a
Talk
little
about
bit about Bowie, right? The
Bowie.
cut-ups,
Yeah.
right? Shuffling, like how to get access to the subconscious in the creative process, cutting things. Of course, he got from Burroughs, and Burroughs got from, I think, Geisen is how you pronounce. They did these cut-ups and mixing up, and then the verbicizer. We won't get into Bowie too much. I'll try not to too much, right? But just another way to access creativity, to access another aspect, or to move into another place. And then you have 1976 Bowie with the Kabbalah and the chalk, and
Yeah.
he's getting kind of into the mysticism, which
Your
Tarot
shirt
has
sort of
that.
reminds me of that.
What's that?
The shirt you're wearing sort of reminds me of the shirt he was wearing on the back
Yeah,
of
and we talked about
Station to
Pollock. This
Station.
kind of is a little
Yeah.
Pollockian.
Yeah.
Looks like
Yeah.
it's just so. Yeah, but let's go back to your interviews and Brian. In the gatekeeper, the Kafka. That image just popped into my head. I couldn't get to him because there was all this
Yeah.
red tape. Maybe we could talk about that aspect, or I'll let you run with it. But like,
Yeah.
like
Well, there's somebody else who is, very, very prominent and just, very consequential that I just, still can't believe that I got to interview was Earl Slick,
yeah, I saw that.
guitarist, right?
Wasn't he sitting with his
Yeah.
dog
Yeah. Well, his dog came in at the end,
or
right?
something, right?
Yeah.
That was
So,
cool. Yeah.
yeah. And he said something that I'll say two things about that interview. The one was he mentioned in passing that people don't stop him on the street when he was walking down the street in New York. He said sometimes he has that experience in London. But, and I was thinking, Marc, I was thinking about, Earl Slick or Mike Garson, they have albums, right? They're on albums. Well,
Yeah.
you have albums, you're on albums, right? And
They're
your
only my
albums
own,
are,
though.
well, I mean,
They're all
so there's,
self-produced.
you're you're making music,
Yeah.
you're
No, I understand.
putting
I'm
them
also
together, right?
being a little bit.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
all right, so more people have an album that Earl Slick played on their shelf than
Yeah,
have an album that you did on their shelf. However,
definitely.
I would say the vast majority of people that have an album know Earl Slick's name,
Right.
slightly
Right.
more than they know your name, right? They don't
No, I
know
understand.
that they've got, right?
Yep.
So Brian Eno, we're talking about fame, his name is probably better known. Um, and then if you get, like I wasn't thinking of Brian Eno,
Yeah.
but I was thinking of, somebody who I'd really like to interview is Iggy Pop, right?
Ah,
But
really?
I
Yeah. Yeah.
can't. Yeah, and I've talked to people that have worked with Iggy Pop, and
Yeah.
everybody who has says that he's
Yeah.
a great guy, and he's
Seems, yeah.
and he's but it's like how you reach Iggy Pop. How did I reach Earl Slick?
Yeah.
I DM'd him.
Directly.
Yeah. And he said, contact my manager, right? And
Yeah.
that like he responded, right? And then I went through his manager, but he responded, right? And it's like I don't think Iggy Pop is reading his own DMs. And
Those guys are probably way too busy in a way too, because they probably get inundated with so many interview requests and all that. If we look at it from their side, if you will, and I'm not in this position either, but I'm imagining because you've got the management, and it becomes the business thing. And so
yeah,
I think there are these gatekeepers like Kafka with the law, and
yeah,
I won't get into, like you mentioned, right, job and government things. You can understand from that side, right, all the red tape. In Japan, it's horrible too. You
yeah,
got to stamp in the next office and the next stamp, and you got to go through red tape. And we think of music and musicians, well, they're artists. So if I say, hey, it's about David Bowie, and could you come on my show? And I've interviewed these people, and I have this you have a kind of like, CV or resume of like what you've done, and they can see it. But then if you can't reach them in the first place, it's maybe not that they're not interested either. If they saw your talk, like you said, if Brian
yeah,
was watching this, he's not going to watch my page either. He doesn't have time for that. Like I'm not out there enough to, it doesn't mean you or I are any less important or any less interesting or any less talented. It just means that, there's that thing, right? It becomes a kind of business thing and promotion and management. And to
yeah,
talk from my end, just to quickly, this isn't about me today, and I try not to make it too much, but it's a two-way thing. Something I'll say is like, I kind of decided to avoid that myself. And one reason people don't have my albums on their shelf, and the reason I joke self-deprecatingly about I'm self-produced, I'm not playing on others' albums that anyone would have in their collection, because that was a choice also to some extent. Not to say that had I gone that route, I would necessarily, because I'm not doing kind of pop music either. I'm kind of avant-garde, and I want to stay that way. I'm the guy in the basement, except I'm not in the basement. But I'm basically
yeah,
the guy in the basement with my own equipment, and I do kind of electronic and stuff too. But that thing, that once you get to that level and you're that like, big, if you will, or you at whatever stage, and then you have all the management people, like, you talked about early on, you'll have to remind me, and this is not because I don't pay attention. I pay attention and I listen, and I can talk about all these things that I loved in the interview. Who was the guy from Main Man, the first guy that you did an audio interview who worked with DeFreeze and those people? Do you remember that? I don't. Anyway,
Tony Zanetta.
thank you, Tony Zanetta. And I remember because
Yeah,
actually at that time you asked me, couldn't you help me with the artwork? Because I need an
yeah,
image. Remember, I did the image originally, and I think you used
yeah,
it. So I remember that interview well, though. Tony Zanetta, thank you. He was
yeah,
talking about this, right? Like the management and how DeFreeze,
yes,
and like he said like he could sell anyone a car or off the street kind of like guy,
yeah,
because like he's on the business end. And so it just gets me to thinking like with Eno or with Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop may be a really great guy, and if you talk to him directly, he'd probably be like, "Cool, yeah, man, hey, let's talk." Like,
yeah,
some of the other, including you've got Garson and others who you could directly contact. But if you have to, that's why I use the Kafka thing. If you have to go through the gatekeeper, and after the first gatekeeper, there's another, and then
yeah,
another, and another,
right.
probably never gets to them. And it's probably because they're too busy. They need, in a
Yeah,
way,
sure. Yeah,
not
no,
a shame, but like they need probably those layers to um filter out.
I can appreciate that. I
Oh,
don't
no, no,
hold
no,
it
I
against,
understand.
yeah.
I just mean like, but that's kind of a shame is what I'm saying too, because like you're very passionate and willing and able and you're a great, I think you're a great interview and you've got a great show and people are watching and your YouTube, I notice your followers have,
Yeah.
this is amazing. To get back to you and your page, let's do that. If you don't
Well,
mind.
yeah, I'll
Yeah,
come
maybe you
back
have
to
a
something
comment to
that you
make
asked,
first, but yeah.
you raised, which was, um, as of when we're speaking, the last interview that posted was with a woman named Sandy Kay,
Sandy K,
who
yeah, she was
Sandy Kay,
wonderful.
right?
I love that.
Yeah,
She's walking
right.
around with her Zoom
Yeah. So
outdoors. That was
she
cool.
is a very prominent journalist from Australia.
Yeah.
I didn't even mention this, but she was the first um, woman news reader in Sydney, Australia, in history. And like I've never lived, I've never stepped foot in Australia, but before interviewing her, I researched her, and if you're in Australia, you would probably know the name Sandy Kay. So
Mhm.
I know her because she has a music interview show that
Right.
has certain superficial similarities to my own. Her show was better, and I came across her show while researching another just incredible guest that I had, um, Tony Newman. So
Right.
Tony Newman is a drummer
Right.
and, among other things, played drums on Diamond Dogs.
Yeah.
That's the Bowie connection. But
Yeah.
he's played drums for everybody,
Yeah.
including, you know, going back to the early 60s when he was in a band that opened for the Beatles, right? And
Oh,
just great stories. And how I got to him is a whole other story. But in preparing for my interview, I
yeah.
wanted to find other interviews that he might have given, and he went on her show, and so I listened to her show,
Yeah.
and I was really interested in his stories. But also now that I'm conducting interviews, I'm listening to how she's conducting her interview,
Yeah.
and I was in awe of, like, if I wasn't doing interviews myself, I wouldn't really be focusing on her and what she's doing to draw out these stories from her guest. But
Mm-mm.
now that I am,
Mm.
I'm paying attention to what she's doing. And I found her technique to be so terrific that I wanted to talk to her. And my show, like, what I get out of my show is this excuse to have these conversations with people that are just fascinating. And
Yeah.
I'm like, every conversation, I'm learning something with whoever it is I'm talking to.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something that I really took. I really took this from that. Like, I record weeks in advance. So I talked to her, I don't know, a month ago, a month and a half ago,
Yeah.
but I've subsequently conducted several interviews. She said, and when I've interviewed you, I have a list of questions.
Yeah.
She said that she doesn't do that.
Yeah.
She
I saw
bases,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm, at the interviews I have going forward, it's hard for me not to write out certain topics that I want to cover,
Right.
but I'm trying to avoid actually reading a question that I wrote out beforehand, which is
Yeah.
what I've done for my first, 75 interviews.
Yeah.
And that, what her interviews have sounded, I think, more conversational than mine. I think that I've done a good job of, asking intelligent questions based on
Yeah.
the subjects.
Yeah. You do your research and you
So,
mentioned in that
yeah,
interview, I watched that recently and left a comment actually.
yeah,
I won't interrupt you too much, but that whole thing about doing your research. And then if I may go back to what you're saying, because I did
yeah,
watch this yesterday, actually.
yeah,
And actually, I want to talk about this in part because what I'm doing now is partly connected in a way, but that was
yeah,
also like that interesting timing thing, like before Dystopia talk we had, you were talking about the Thin White Duke kind of thing. Um, I'm terrible. I'm a terrible interviewer because not only do I interrupt too many times, but I also go off on these crazy tangents. Some people, like you, seem to be okay with that, which for me is wonderful because it lets me do it and I don't have to feel too bad about it. But some people really can't, even like in conversation, get really, and I have to kind of, I said too much again. I gotta like shut my mind down a little, let the other person talk. And I think that's really important. And one thing she mentioned was that being a
yes,
listener and
yes,
drawing out from the other person. The other part that you just mentioned was, right, letting the conversation flow as it flows without like just having a list of questions and kind of sticking to that. And I'll just
yeah,
make one last comment from my end and then let you talk again, which is, I think that's also, it could be a technique thing, like, right, like
it
that
is.
technique that you're saying.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, I will suggest, like for myself, not just with interviews, but like when I write, for example. I left this comment actually on that blog yesterday after listening. Something similar. I'll just say it here, which is like some writers, they write everything out. They write all the characters, the names, the connections, the plot arc, and they do all that before they write the first word of their novel, apparently. And then other writers, the kinds of writers that I tend to favor or have liked, are a little more stream of consciousness, like Nabokov, just go. Abe Kobo, a Japanese author, just go. I've read interviews where they talk about the process, and I tend to be that type, and I tend to be that type in interviews. Like, I didn't make a list of questions, but I did have some in my mind. I don't think it's like writing out and reading them is bad, nor do I think that not writing them and going freeform is good necessarily. I think it depends, but I think having that openness and letting it flow could produce some interesting things. And she was talking about that. So I was kind of like
Yes.
nodding my head. But on the other hand, I think there's also a balance, maybe. Like what I wanted to say on my end and then let you speak again is like listening to that interview and having you on the show today and trying to let you talk more, which I'm doing a really bad job again, which is this, that on my end, I sometimes end up talking too much or going off on tangents. I think one thing that she does apparently that's really good, and one thing that you also are very good at, and if I want to be an interviewer and have more people and do this more, I need to learn too, is to let the other person talk and to listen and to be a good
Yeah.
listener. And I think Sandy Kay is probably a very good listener. I think you are
Yeah.
also a very good listener. And even you've let me go off on crazy tangents where even when you let me edit the thing, I had to edit my own stuff because I was like, oh my God, I rambled for like 10 minutes. I didn't let John get a word in edgewise. I'm horrible even as the interviewee. But how much worse for an interviewer, which right now, right, even though I said this is two-way. So let you speak again.
Yeah.
I think Sandy Kay was fascinating. I just want to say, because I did listen to her yesterday and your
Yeah.
talk, and I thought, man, I could learn a lot from that too, just as I learned from you.
Yeah.
I think you're a really good interviewer, John, by the way. Whether
Well,
you're
thank
reading
you.
off of a piece of paper or not, you let the person talk and you draw things out. And so kudos,
Well,
man.
what
I'm really bad at that.
you're referring to something that she said where I'm just going to add a detail of what
Yeah,
she said, which was she
yeah,
said, um, uh, people comment that I don't interrupt the guest, and she said, "Well, why would I interrupt the guest?
yeah,
We want to hear from the guest, right?"
yeah, yeah.
So, um, so I didn't push back on that, but now I've listened to several
Okay.
back issues of her show,
Yeah,
and she actually does sometimes, right? But subtly, so she can steer the interview
yeah,
in a subtle way,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That's
And the
important.
other thing, yeah, the other thing that I've discovered, but I know she has as well,
Yeah.
is I mean, she has a far better produced show than I do.
She's been at
I'm
it
my
professionally for how
Yeah,
long, right? I mean,
right, yeah. I mean, she's a real journalist, and
yeah.
I'm not, but
But you're doing
editing
great,
is
by the way.
also
I just I have to jump in and just say that, okay?
yeah,
I have to pat you on the back a bit because you're self-produced, like I'm self-produced with music. You're doing
yeah.
great.
Well, so I'll talk about an interview I did with you. So editing is important.
Yeah.
So, I was talking to you, I think the dystopia conversation, and if I just let the interview run, when I posted it,
Yeah.
there was 20 minutes that was sort of leading up to the actual
I know
topic,
what you're talking about.
right? And
Exactly.
yeah, so we went back and forth about how to edit it, but like I
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to get to
yeah.
what the conversation was actually about.
Yeah, I gave all the
Because
backstory about my classes
yeah,
and stuff, right? I remember that. Yeah.
right. And it's not like I'm not saying that that was not in itself interesting, but in a way it was, I'm thinking, so one of the other things I noticed is that just because somebody watches the video doesn't mean that they watch it all the way through. Right. So it's like I have it in mind, and some of this I'm guessing, and some of this I'm looking at. I'm just trying to infer information from the limited data that I get from YouTube.
Yeah.
But if somebody's coming to, my channel is called Maggiore on Bowie, and I'm just assuming that people want to hear about David Bowie, right?
Okay.
So so if we're not
And I
talking about
taught a
David
class
Bowie,
on news and blah blah blah. Okay,
yeah,
what's next?
right. So if we're not talking about David Bowie right away, then I'm
Talk.
assuming people might drop off.
Yeah.
Now, I have some guests where the connection to David Bowie is tangential,
Yes.
but even then, I try to like I have some great conversations that are coming up that are tangential. But I've said to a couple of my upcoming guests, you don't need to know anything about David Bowie. Let me set it up, and then I'm going to ask you about your thing.
Right.
And there's a connection, but I at least need to set the table for the audience.
Sure.
Why? So why am I interviewing for an audience if I'm writing in the blog for nobody? Well, because I think if I'm going to get
It's
a
not
Mike
nobody.
Garson or an,
I read it.
well, no,
Forget about
what I'm
Google
not.
Analytics, man. There some
No,
people are
no.
reading it. It's
What I
not
mean
only
by I'm
numbers.
writing for, I don't mean that nobody's reading it. I'm
I know.
reading that I don't have
I'm
an
joking.
audience in mind, right?
I'm just joking.
I don't like, but it's an important distinction, right? I'm writing without an audience in mind.
Right.
I'm writing for myself, and
Right.
if you read it or somebody else reads it and you like it, terrific, wonderful, right? I'm putting it out there so somebody could find it, but I'm not writing with you in mind.
I understand what you mean.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but when I'm doing an interview,
Yeah.
I'm interviewing for an audience. Why? And the reason is
Yeah.
and again, I don't know this for a fact, but if I'm going to get a Mike Garson or an Earl Slick or Sandy Kay or a Marc Lowe, it should be worth your while to come on my show. And if nobody's watching it, then it's just like, why would you talk to me?
Well,
So
that's why I'm still the guy in the basement because if nobody comes to my shows, I might as well just do my room or go to the studio. So it's like there's no audience, who cares, right? No, but I hear you. I hear you. I mean, that gets into another issue of right, who is the audience and why and what is the goal of, and do you make a Leon that won't be accepted by the label, but might be a great thing that a few people will love? Or do you do Let's Dance, or do you do it just to be extreme, or do you do Outside, or do you do that's
well, I think
that's a whole other
yeah.
topic we could talk about, like almost. So I totally understand, like if you have an audience in mind and you want people to watch and make it worth the time, that totally, absolutely makes sense.
I think you're touching on a distinction between um, art and whatever it is I'm doing on that show. So,
Hmm.
you're more of an actual artist than I am, but
Well, may I say one other
yeah,
thing to connect to you directly and what you said
yeah,
about yourself? You said, I'm writing for no one.
yeah,
That is that's equals the Leon Sessions
yes,
in my brain, but it's
yes,
not for no one because, and I keep saying that not because I understand your meaning. I'm half saying
yeah,
it with a little grin and a wink.
yeah,
Okay, I want you to understand that. That's how I am. I'm a little like that.
yeah,
But what I also mean in this very serious sense, and I mean this really honestly and seriously, when I say I read it, John, and I really enjoy it, and I'm not saying that just because you're on my show and I want to compliment
yeah,
you to make you feel good. I'm saying genuinely, I read your blog with interest, and actually, although I'm a David Bowie fan and I listen to David Bowie and I've done tributes and blah blah, and that's how we connected. I actually really enjoy reading when you go off on tangents and go
yeah,
to the non-Bowie tangents, even if you start with David Bowie was this, in terms of politics, he had this thing. But, I'm
yeah,
thinking about this, and maybe you're not even agreeing with Bowie's idea at all, but you're going off
right,
in another direction, talking about some political, I won't even use any names of even what you wrote about or who or what. But like that
yeah,
kind of post, or a post about, I saw this film and it made me think of that. I think those
right,
posts are really fascinating, and I love to read your writing. And so those are the writings I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're referring to as I'm writing for no one, and Google out it
yes,
says not that many people are bothering to read it, but I'm reading it, and this is one of the things, if I may say this, I was
yeah,
going to joke earlier, but I didn't have a chance, and I didn't want to interrupt you. When you said I discovered Google Analytics, and you kept talking, so I didn't want to interrupt, I was going to
yeah,
butt in with a joke and say, "Oh, I'm sorry," or "My condolences."
yeah,
Because when I look at those like statistic things because I look at them for my YouTube page. I'm on Spotify, which I want to get off because I don't like the politics of that guy who's,
yeah,
you know, not paying the artist, and he just raised the price of the subscription, and he's funding AI for the military. We're not going to talk about this, but or Apple Music or any of them. And I look at my analytics, it's like, okay, X number of people listened and they were from this country, and or I had this and sometimes you go down the rabbit hole with that, and it's like, but who ultimately, what does it mean? And let me just say one more thing. Just by the way, maybe you know this already. Do you know the theory? Now we're getting off on a tangent, which I think could be interesting that relates. The dead internet theory. Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay, let me mention what this is.
Yeah.
Apparently, like, I don't remember what percentage, but it's like more than 50%. I think it's like 50 or 60 or something crazy, big number of all these things, comments we see and likes we see and thumbs up,
Yeah.
thumbs down on YouTube. They're bots. They're not people.
Yeah.
So I think for you and for me, my condolences, because like me too, if I'm looking at my YouTube stats, some of it might actually not be people. It might be like,
No, that's
like an
that's
algorithmic
interesting.
bot.
Yeah.
So
I
if you're writing for no one, you might really be writing for no one when you think you're writing for someone because you got like, oh, my hits went way up. It could be, some of that could be fake, but then like within that, the writing for no one, maybe 5 people actually read it with interest, like myself and some
Yeah.
other people living in France, like Dom or someone that
Right.
don't know
Yeah.
about it until they contact you or don't, that actually are reading it, and you think I'm writing it for myself for no one, but there's some percentage of actual human beings, earthlings. I don't want knowledge, I want certainty, God damn it.
Yeah.
Who are reading the thing and interested, but you don't know about them, and you're not getting the
Yeah.
stats numbers aren't very high. So you think no one's interested, but actually they are. So I'm giving that as a little bit of the devil's advocate on the positive side.
Yeah. Well, it's all positive, right? It's all positive, and
Yeah.
some of what you're referring to, where I go off on tangents, is some of my favorite writing. And when I went going back to the point during the lockdown when I committed to writing every day, part of the reason, like the main reason that I committed to writing every day, is writing helps me think more clearly, and so there's a purpose to it.
Yeah.
To articulate a thought,
Yeah.
and to sometimes, those are types of articles where I go off on a tangent. I still usually do some kind of research so that I'm learning something and I'm writing with some foundation. I try not to just sort of spin out there without any foundation. Well, I mean, but well, I mean, as with me,
Yeah.
you put out more content than anybody could possibly follow.
Right.
And
I'm writing for no one, and I'm making music for no one. But
yeah, and I think that that is an artistic impulse. Whereas although I don't get any monetary compensation for the show, I do. There's 2 things I get.
Yeah.
The one is more guests,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the other is, the conversation. I would pay for these conversations, right? And I mean, actually, it costs me to do the show. Like I talking to you on a new microphone, and that costs me money. So I do pay to do the right. But it's just fascinating. Just another anecdote. I haven't even posted this yet, but off of another cover of the week by a band called The Cynz, Cynz.
Cynz, okay, yeah.
Yeah. I asked if I could interview them, and they said sure, and I ended up doing it in person. And I went down to Hoboken, New Jersey, and I know you have some familiarity with Hoboken and with New Jersey. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I do know that I've stepped foot in Hoboken before, because there's a building with a giant David Bowie mural in Hoboken.
Ah, really? Really?
Yeah.
When did that go up? That must have been after he died, right?
Well,
Because I was in Japan. I don't think I'd ever seen that. Wow.
Yeah.
Or maybe
if you look it up, it says 2015. The artist
okay, the year
is
before. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that that's accurate. That might have been, the artist is named Eduardo Cobra, who I am trying to actually interview. And when I went down recently, I filmed a stand-up in front of the mural in case I'm able to interview him. I could do that as an intro.
Got your photo shoot before you got. That's cool. Yeah, no. That makes sense. Yeah.
But
on location.
And I know he's going to come to upstate New York soon. So I'm hoping to be able to interview the artist.
Cool.
But why am I saying this?
Yeah.
Other than that, I had not been to Hoboken, and just the opportunity to go, I learned about this town, which is a really cool town. And
Yeah.
I didn't, I don't know the last time you've been there, but
Oh my
I
God.
learned,
Long time ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you used to live in New Jersey.
Yeah, I'm from New Jersey. My
You're
parents
from
live
New
there.
Jersey.
I
Yeah.
haven't been. I haven't even been to the States in years. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Apparently it went through a renaissance in the 90s, and it is
Right, right,
this,
right. Yeah.
yeah, it's this really, I'm really happy to have been able to see Hoboken, right? And how, I mean, that
Yeah.
even sort of, I mean, the name Hoboken, it sounds sort of funny, right? I mean, it's like, you don't think Hoboken, New Jersey. No, it's a really cool place. And
It's the
that
hobo.
is
Yeah.
an experience that I might not have had it not been for this interview show that I'm doing.
Sure.
And so that's that I'm getting, so I'm writing to get something, which is the next interview, right? And so I want to do a good job, and I want it to be entertaining and interesting, and I want the guest to feel like it was worth talking to me. So
I think most, if not all guests end up feeling
yeah,
that way, John. I mean, I think you make people feel comfortable and you ask good questions and you listen and all of
yeah.
that. So just from my perspective. So yeah, Matt, that makes sense. So let me
So
ask, you were talking about the sins, SYNZ. So what
CYNZ, yeah,
a CYNZ, sorry, I got
yeah,
it wrong. So did you went to interview them, you said, right? So
yeah.
what's the next part of that? Did you have something you were going to say about it? Just the fact that you discovered Hoboken through the interview was
Right. Yeah. No, no, they were terrific. And
okay.
I won't go into too much detail because I haven't posted the interview yet, but
Oh no, that's fine.
they yeah, but they were terrific. And it's if you're I'm talking to you and you're in Japan, but if you're in the northeastern United States, the sins are coming near you soon. So, you know,
Cool.
track them down. They're worth seeing, and they're coming to the town next to Albany, Troy in October, and I'm hoping to
Cool.
see them.
Cool.
And they did the lead. Well, I'll just say this, and they did the lead off single for a tribute album, a Bowie tribute album that's being put out by Gem Records. And what I found fascinating was when I say the lead off single, meaning it was the first single that was released from the tribute album,
Right.
it is a cover of Can't Help Thinking About Me.
Yeah, that's a really early 60s original
Yeah,
from Bowie that he redid for a toy.
that's exactly
Right?
right.
Yeah, I know.
And you know the song,
But
but
we're
it's
Bowie
not,
people. We've got this stuff.
yeah,
So yeah.
it's not one of his better known songs.
No, it's
And
not.
yeah, so I thought that was interesting as a choice to lead off, the promotion of a tribute album, and
Totally.
they did a great job with it. And
I'd love to hear it. That'd be great.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't
So
help thinking about me. It sounds like the Who or something, right?
he was, yeah. I mean, he was certainly influenced by the Who, and they. Well, I mean, look, just to stay on this for a moment, right? So if you think, I mean, you know the song, and you know how he did it in the '60s,
Yes.
and maybe that refrain. It's almost like there's too many words, and it almost sounds right.
I remember
So
Bowie giving an anecdote about that during a concert. Maybe you know this. Maybe that's even where in the not late 90s he was working on Toy. He hadn't released it, but he did that song live a few times with the band. He said that during one thing he was, chatting
did
with the
he?
audience. He's like, there's so many. It kind of like, I think, unless I'm hallucinating this, he said something similar about when he went on in the UK and Jonathan something wanted him to do from Hunky Dory, the Bewley Brothers. And he's like, this thing's like
Yeah,
War and Peace. I need like so many sheets
yeah,
to remember all the lyrics. And I think can't help thinking about him. He's like, this stuff.
yeah.
So go ahead. Just
So the lead singer Cindy Dawson, what she did was she changed the emphasis, so
ah,
she lingers on the word about,
yeah,
and
I'm
it
thinking about.
really works. Yeah,
Ah, cool.
about me, right? And I mean, I can't sing, but she can, and
Oh,
it really works. So it's
yeah,
that part of what I liked about that, and this sort of gets into the cover of the week is,
yeah,
that's a song that I think gives somebody like you material to work with.
yeah,
Whereas, the song that I encounter most frequently is Heroes as as a cover.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there are a lot of really high quality covers of Heroes,
sure.
some of which break through and are like, okay, even though I've heard so many covers of Heroes, this is too good not to choose.
Sure.
but I think it's sort of a higher bar because it's been interpreted so frequently, right? And
An
it's
anthem.
still,
Become an anthem.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. There's still something you could do with it, but it's like, there's more obscure songs. I think there's so much more potential.
There are a lot of
Um,
obscure songs actually that people
yeah,
cover often. Yeah. I try
right.
to do some of them too. It's yeah, and you also have a good eye and ear for that, by the way. I'm also just to comment on your blog, and we're talking about Bowie in the blog in the cover of the week. Your cover of the week section or whatever, what do you
Yeah.
call it? Feature.
It's a feature, yeah.
Feature, yeah, is the word for it, right? Is amazing because, and I've said this to you before. I'm sure I have, or I've commented on maybe Facebook or somewhere. I've said this to you before, I think, which is that like, man, like you've got such an eagle's eye, and I mean it's like in a good way. Like you're just, and as you said, like in any given week there might be two or three or 10, some by more famous, I don't want to use that word
Yeah.
lightly, or
Yeah.
more known artists, right? Or bands or people that the name would come out like Blixa Bargeld, right? Did like last
Yes,
or
yes.
like that, for example.
He did a whole EP,
Side,
yeah, of
you've got the guy
Bowie
in the
covers.
basement, or
Yeah.
you've got Marc Lowe, who nobody really knows, but are doing these things, maybe even obscure things, and you're finding them. That's how you found me. That's why we're talking today.
Yeah.
So you have a good eye for that, an ear for that. You often say I'm not a musician and this, but you at the same time you're this is one thing I was going to ask you about that I hadn't had time to about your just generally, like more generally, not about the blog or, you were talked about writing and organizing thoughts in COVID, but your passion. Maybe you could just say a word or two, which you could probably say a lot more, but how, I don't know how much time you have left. We have left. I'm okay, but about your passion for David Bowie.
Yeah.
And you've kind of course, alluded to it and how you can go into so many things and you always have, and the covers of the week. But just like more generally, I want to give you the conch, right? You're
Yeah.
going to talk again. John, tell us about just your passion for David Bowie in as much or
Yeah.
as little detail as you like. If you want to run with that,
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, some of it is a mystery to me, right?
yeah.
But it starts with I like the way his music sounds, right? On the
Oh,
most
that's a
basic
good start.
level,
Yeah.
right?
He's a musician.
So yeah, and I listen to David Bowie music. I say this is a very, very slight exaggeration.
Yeah.
He's the only human voice I've heard every day for the past 40 years. It is not literally true. I mean, there's no other human voice I've heard every day for the past 40 years. But I have not nobody. I mean, my own maybe, yeah. But other than that, yeah. But almost every day for the last 40 years, I've listened to at least one David Bowie song.
Which
And
album or song do you listen to the most? And I'll let you go back. I'm just going to quickly.
I think probably over the last 5 years, that's probably been Diamond Dogs, and probably over the course of the last 40 years, it's probably been Scary Monsters.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it's like I think of what albums do I listen to more than others. So, Ziggy, One Outside, we've talked about One Outside.
Yeah.
That's One Outside might be the album. I'm going to say this wrong, but you'll understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It might be the album that I listened to the most since it came out.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. In the
Yeah.
in the 90s, yeah. No, actually, I mean, yeah, we've talked about Outside, but like in terms of our relationship to the album and the time, that connection.
But Diamond Dogs, since it became like part of the soundtrack, like the main part of the soundtrack of the pandemic year, but really 2021, right? Less than 2020. Yeah. And I was one of the great things about Bowie, and this is where I say I don't know about music. I'm not talking about musically. I'm talking about lyrically. Yeah. You're able, and he invited this. You're able to find meaning in, abstract lyrics or impressionistic lyrics. Absolutely. And so I was finding, and I still am finding meaning in Diamond Dogs that he could not possibly have intended. Yes. Because he wrote the album, more than 50 years ago, right?
And he used the cut-ups for that.
Yes.
And that goes back to something I said earlier that we were talking about, like the tarot, and that reminded me of him with the chalk. And that's one reason I think Diamond Dogs has that power, because some of it, I think literally, he didn't know exactly what it meant either, but it was something from his subconscious. And in the Cracked Actor film, he talks about this, although he's a little coked out, but he talks
Yeah.
about this. And I think
Yeah.
that's just to say that, because we talk about Bowie, now we're getting to Bowie, which is always and fine and great.
Yeah.
I love, by the way, I think we have similar taste in some ways. Of course, you very broad, and I am too, actually. I listen to the whole catalog. I like most of it. There's some things I don't like as much in the 80s, maybe, but basically. But like, if you asked me, I would say, wow, well, yeah, I really love from the early period, I would say Diamond Dogs is my favorite from like
Yeah.
pre-75. Post 75, I would say maybe Berlin, but also Scary Monsters. And I taught in my
Yeah.
dystopia class, and also
Yeah.
part of that was because of the book that I used,
Yeah.
right? Adam's book. And One Outside. And let
Yeah.
me make a quick comment, and then I want to ask you to talk more about your passion and Bowie from your end. But One Outside, the first year I came to Japan, 1995, that album came out. I was already a Bowie fan. The last album I had bought by Bowie was Black Tie, White Noise. I hadn't known about Buddha of Suburbia till after, because they didn't promote it much. It was a soundtrack.
Yeah.
And after I discovered it, it was like, whoa, this, I didn't even know. This is incredible. And I love that too, by the way. But like you, probably the same. I've listened to One Outside like intensely since it came out, and was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for what's now called the Leon Suites or sessions to.
Yes.
And then when it hit YouTube or whatever, I was like, oh my God, it was like great.
Yeah.
But where is it, And so that goes into, we talked about so many times, and tributes and blah, blah. But Outside had that power. And Outside, I'll just say my last comment and let you talk again. Although he was using technology by that point to do it, the verbicizer program on the Mac, he also did that for the lyrics. The Heart's Filthy Lesson were cut up lyrics. The computer scrambled them. What is the Heart's Filthy Lesson, and how do we interpret? And, and even the storyline has all these holes in it. So I think
Right.
it's fascinating, isn't it? But anyway, I
Yeah.
just wanted to say, I think our tastes connect, but let me let you talk. And also probably we have a time limit, but what else maybe you wanted to say about?
Yeah, well, it's that process of interpretation and contemplation. I think, you could do something similar with the Bible. You could do something similar with Shakespeare. You could do something similar with, your Jackson Pollock inspired shirt, right? Sit in front of a Jackson Pollock and just contemplate it for hours, and thoughts will enter your head that Jackson Pollock didn't intend.
That's right.
And, I suspect that, I like Bob Dylan. I suspect that I could do the same with Bob Dylan. I like, I don't know, Neil Young, right? I suspect I could do
You
the
saw
same
him
with Neil
live
Young.
recently, I think.
Well, not Neil Young. I saw an excellent cover band,
Oh, it's a
Neil
cover
Young
band.
cover band. Yeah. But they were really super. And I just stumbled upon this free concert by a cover band called Harvest and Rust. And they were wonderful. And I wasn't expecting that, but they were very, very good.
Oh,
But I probably, in part because I saw a David Bowie concert in 1987 and I was just blown away by the whole experience.
that's funny.
But in part because it's like at the end of the day, it comes back to I like the way his music sounds. So
Right. But also the
yeah,
lyrics, fascinating. Yeah.
the lyrics, right? I mean, I could just contemplate that's what I do. I contemplate the lyrics, and you're able to find patterns. But as humans, we look for patterns, and we find patterns where they don't exist. So that I'm able to do that with Bowie. But then the other thing, and we sort of alluded to this, is that you could use Bowie as a starting point for something else,
Yeah.
right? So I'll just, I'll give an example. We mentioned in passing 1984.
Yeah.
So in part, another interview that was just an interview I really enjoyed, and I think that you and I have corresponded about it, is with a Fordham professor named Glenn Hendler,
Yes,
who wrote a book about Diamond Dogs, right? And a short 33 and a third book,
Yes.
but it's very, very insightful. And
Yes, it's great. Song by song analysis. The analysis.
yeah,
Good.
yeah. I learned stuff that I didn't know from reading that book. And that, in part, and in part, listening to Diamond Dogs so much, and some of the discussion around Diamond Dogs inspired me to reread 1984, which I read the last time I read it might have been in 1984, and I literally, I mean, but it was in the 80s, and I always thought of it as like one of my favorite novels, even though I haven't read it since I was a teenager.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's interesting what I remembered, very clearly and what I didn't remember. But
Right.
so I have lined up an interview with a very prominent professor to talk about the book, right? Not about Diamond Dogs, but
Yeah,
about the
horrible. Great.
book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so David Bowie opens that door, and he's also opened the door to other musicians, yourself included. How would I know you if it wasn't for David Bowie?
No,
How
absolutely.
would
I'm
I know?
thankful for that.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. How would I know this, the Sins, right? I mean, it's possible because they tour in my geography. It's possible that I would have come across them, but
Right.
that meeting was sort of accelerated. But I'll give you, two other like, you know, quasi-famous names or famous names.
Well, be
Um,
careful with that term. Famous.
yeah,
What's
Donnie McCaslin and Henry Hay,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
just incredibly accomplished musicians.
yeah,
And,
of course.
Donnie McCaslin, I think, especially in the jazz world, is very, very well known. And Black Star, another album that I listened to quite a bit,
Yeah,
it's really a Donnie McCaslin album,
yeah.
with David Bowie
It's
as
a
the lead
collaboration.
vocalist,
It's a
right? Yeah.
collaboration.
It's a
It's
collaboration,
Bowie
right?
and McCaslin is what it is. And they
Yeah,
were a big
it is.
McCaslin band or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you
Yeah.
listen to other Bowie albums, you're not going to hear another one that's like Black Star. But if you listen to other Donnie McCaslin albums, you'll say that's the guy that was on Black Star,
That's
and he
right.
has some of the same musicians.
That's right.
Well, I'm listening to these other, like both of them
Yeah.
got me listening to jazz,
Yeah.
right? And Henry Hay has a band called Fork with a Q,
Yes.
and I would have never come across Fork, but they're delightful, and it's I'm not a jazz guy, but I like listening to these albums. So that's another thing that I get out of David Bowie. Then Bowie is also he's not just a musician; he's a conceptual artist. Somebody else that I interviewed that was just Jennifer Elster,
Yeah. Who did the outside
the design.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And she said, David Bowie and I are both conceptual artists. And she's absolutely 100% right.
I watched those.
Right.
I watch all your interviews.
Yeah.
I watch all of them, man. Yeah, I saw that too.
No,
Yeah.
I mean that was my first in-person interview, and it was just a wonderful experience. And she's a fascinating person. And but Bowie, his presentation, the idea, you can't just like imagine if Ziggy was performed by a guy that looked like Bruce Springsteen, who would go and do the exact same songs on stage with the guitar and wearing a t-shirt and jeans, right? It's not the full or Black Star. Or I mean, imagine if a 27-year-old came out with Black Star and
I
he's in
can't imagine.
perfect health.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, right. He's in perfect health and
Yeah.
he's giving jokey interviews about it afterwards. It's like there's a concept that like Bowie demands that you're thinking about his physical presentation, his movements, that design, right? It's like, the thought that went into the design of the characters he took on and not on the album of One Outside is part of the whole presentation.
Absolutely.
So it's, he gives us a lot to do. He's not a one-sided,
Absolutely.
entertainer, right? He's giving us a lot to do with what he's putting out there. So that's,
I think we share that. I mean, that's my fascination, my strange fascination with
yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Jones, Mr. Bowie. The same. I mean, so it's like I think that's a thing, isn't it, John, for us? And I thank you for for saying that in this way because, like, yeah, it's like the conceptual art, the thought, the lyrics, the whole package. But at the end of the day, as you said, right, what your comment is, I like the music, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
listen to it every day. I like
yeah,
his voice, and I've heard it every day for 40 years, kind of thing. And I think for many of us, that's been the case. And I think just to go off of what you said too, Bowie has also introduced me to other musicians and other things. So many
yeah,
things. Not actually for me, it's been because I've always been sort of a voracious like listener of different things. And I actually got into David Bowie through Robert Fripp being
yeah,
on his album because I was listening to King Crimson. That's kind of, and then
yeah,
April Blues on Lodger, and then Fripp is on both Heroes and Scary Monsters, right? And then
yes,
I was like, oh my God. because my image of David Bowie was the foofy hair and Let's Dance, and I was like, oh, he's a
Yeah.
pop guy, and I had no idea kind of about his avant-garde stuff, which I kind of right. So just to make a quick thing from my end to say that, but like Bowie's interest, like let's say take Outside that we talked about fairly extensively, but that thing is like a spiral with no end. Like Leon, it just
Yeah.
goes, it goes, you find more and more and more about the story. And the fact that the story has so many holes and openings for interpretation makes it that much more interesting to keep digging. Some of it might be interpretation. Maybe we're just imagining the pattern, or maybe
Yeah.
there's actually a pattern or a connection. And like Outside, for example, like, or Joe the Lion, like, oh, who's that about? And oh, there was this guy that Bowie was,
Yes.
he was so interested in everything and every
Yeah.
end of the art world. And yet he had this strange ability to also make it pop and make it accessible
Yeah.
and to invite the audience to participate. Give me your hands, you're not alone. And yet Bowie was very much like the other flip side of that was, all the madmen, here I am talking to my wall. I'm not quite right at all. I'm afraid of going insane and going schizophrenic. But yet at the same time, he's able to draw in people and say, you and I are together in this, man. So I think that's just an incredible ability he had.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
I don't know, absolutely. And I don't know who else does that.
Yeah,
So,
like him, right? Nobody, I take
yeah.
it away. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's what draws people like you and I and other artists, so many artists, not only the people you work with and you've been interviewing, but like the people you've interviewed, right? Like you've interviewed band members and management people, but also just artists like Jennifer, um, and
Elster.
Elster, Elster, right? Yeah,
Elster.
yeah, Jennifer Elster, or other artists you've interviewed, other people on all ends of the Bowie spectrum. And like I want
Yeah.
to say this too, maybe in closing, probably we have to wrap up soon, but like one thing I respect about you, but also enjoy about your blog and your interviews so much as a listener and a reader is that you just go everywhere, and I mean this in a good way. You do focus one by one, you do your
Yeah.
research, you respect your interviewees, you respect your subject, and if you're writing something that's a thought piece that you're writing for no one, which again I said it's not, but you're feeling I'm writing this because I want to like put this down and share
Yeah.
it. But like each time you're taking that and you're spending a lot of time and interest and but what I want to say here is you're also you could write about politics, you could write about fashion, you could write about like a popular movie and make some Bowie connection. You could talk to an artist from the fashion end or the design end or the movie end or the production end or the music end, being a musician on stage and how was it working with him. Or you could invite someone to talk about George Orwell's 1984 because Bowie was interested in 1984 and connects to Diamond Dogs, but it's not really about David Bowie. And yet you would
Right.
connect it, and yet that makes it so fascinating, I think, because anyone could find something somewhere on your blog if they're interested in Bowie, or even if they're not, maybe that might
Yeah.
be someone's into David Bowie's music. Like I was
Sure.
interested in
Yeah.
George Orwell and Dystopia, for example, and I read this thing or watched this interview, and then I went and listened to Diamond Dogs. And that's
Yeah.
cool too, is that for someone who knows nothing about Bowie. And I think
Right.
you, just to say this and like give you a little credit here, John, because you're doing a great job. Also as a what you're doing, I love it, and I love your passion for your blog and your interviews and everything. Um, just from a somewhat subjective or objective or what to say point, taking a step back and just looking that way, is that you're pulling all these things together, and maybe you're drawing people in to learn who is David Bowie or to discover also aspects of him that others maybe didn't, and the lyrics and the analyses, and you go very deep, and you invite people who go deep to talk about those aspects and not just about the music. And I think that's fascinating. Not many people do that or can do that. So
Yeah.
kudos to you, John.
Well, thank you. I
Maggiore on Bowie is a great page, both the YouTube and the blog, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's fun to do, and
Yeah,
I'll, yeah, I guess in closing,
yeah,
just
yeah,
about that,
yeah,
when I decided that I was going to write every day, uh, there's a limited number of topics that I could really commit to writing about every day.
right,
So, there's topics related to my work, but in part, I wanted to think about something other than work. And so there was David Bowie, right? So almost anything else would have been, well, this seems like it might be interesting. And I don't know how much I could commit to something that seems like it might be interesting because I don't really know,
Sure.
right? But I knew that I had been listening to and contemplating Bowie. So some of what you just said
Yeah.
is a little bit of sleight of hand on my part,
Good.
in the sense
We like
that,
sleight of hand, don't we?
yeah, well, what I mean by that is, there's a line in a James Bond movie where he Bond realizes that a woman was, at the villain's secret lair because he recognizes the gun was made for a woman, and the
That
villain
we
says,
gotta watch out with those. But John, I love James Bond. Yeah,
yeah, well, the villain
I can feel it.
Largo says, you seem to know quite a bit about guns, Mr. Bond. And he says, no, I know a little about women, right? So it's like, I don't know about music, but I know about David Bowie. So it's,
I want to ask one last thing.
yeah,
Did you? It's a serious question, actually, and it's something I remember because of my interest in it, and it's something that might have just slipped past, but I'm actually still thinking about. Did you ever get the guy to talk about Bowie and Buddhism?
it's scheduled, but I haven't done it yet. Yeah.
But it is scheduled.
Yeah.
Great. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to that because I'm.
Yeah.
That's also an interest of mine. One thing I don't talk about much is, I did Japanese literature, but I also did Buddhist studies on the side there.
Yeah.
I'm going to
No,
get clear about
I, I'm, I,
that.
I won't mention the names because they haven't happened yet.
That's fine.
And
No,
just,
that's fine.
in case but I've got three coming up that I'm really looking forward to that are less about Bowie himself and more about topics that are related to Bowie. And that's one of them. So I have a very prominent professor, who's an expert in Tibetan Buddhism.
Right.
So that's scheduled.
Yeah, that's
That's the school, that's the type of Buddhism that Bowie had some interest in. But,
That's one of two, actually. Yeah, that's the main one, though. Yeah, yeah, it is.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Also,
Um,
Zen Buddhism a little bit. Yeah,
yeah. And then I have the 1984 show coming up. And
right.
then I have, I'm just, again, it's like, here's the other thing, Mark. It's like, I don't know if it's 60% or 80%, but certainly a majority of the people that I've asked that I'm actually able to reach agree to come on my show.
That's
And
awesome.
I have a very prominent astrophysicist coming on to talk about, yeah, to talk about nothing.
Awesome.
And
Oh,
yeah,
awesome, awesome. Oh, that's super exciting. Oh, I love the
yeah,
topic. And I know you mentioned that that's right, the lyric that Bowie. Oh, that's going to be great. And actually,
yeah.
you know what I'd love is a round table, three of you, the Tibetan Buddhism guy, and the astrophysicist on nothing. Buddhism, nothing, and that
Oh
would
yeah,
work.
no, like that again, I'm not going to
You
say
know?
their names, but the
Yeah,
professor who's going to talk about Buddhism, we went back and forth and he,
yeah.
made a distinction between nothing and emptiness. And,
Yes, there is a distinction. I know.
there is a
That's
distinction,
Buddhism.
right?
Yes, of course. Of
So,
course. And there are different
and
terms in Sanskrit too. Yeah. That's
yeah, and the
yeah.
physicist, I think, would make a distinction between a religious concept of nothing and the Higgs boson particle. So it's like,
Wow, that's
you
that.
know,
I got to take a step back. I don't know anything about that. That's going to
well,
be
I'm going to learn,
interesting.
right? So
That's
it's
going to be
like,
interesting. No, I love stuff.
yeah,
That's great. I love stuff like that. It's going to, how fascinating. See, again, right? The hub, the Bowie, like who would have thought, right? You're going off on totally, but that's so cool. That's totally what we're talking, right? You do this. It's so cool.
yeah.
Awesome, man. I
So,
love it. Thank you,
so
John.
stay tuned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to the viewers, right? So
Yeah,
there's just so much content. It's Bowie, but it's also everything and nothing.
yeah.
What, oh God, I want to use a line, but I won't. Okay, because I'm gonna get it wrong, actually. I'm thinking of David Sylvian now, everything and nothing. But Bowie was nothing has changed, everything has changed, or nothing remains, and etc. But that word nothing, right? It's always there. Thank you so much, John.